In 1989, revolution swept throughout the world, changing the political landscape in entire continents and sending nations into chaos. The death of communism had come. Across the entire Eastern Bloc, dictators were executed or removed, and reforms began to take effect. Through peaceful demonstrations and violent rebellions, the people retook their land and their power. But amidst this wave of political upheaval, one conflict, grander than any other in scale and impact, would fall short of its goal, and in doing so, write the future of a people for generations to come.
What a place, what a time, what a story. It's Friday morning here, and this is Tiananmen Square. Today, it's the People's Square, all right. More than 1 million Chinese demanding democracy and freedom and proclaiming the new revolution.
In the Gate of Heavenly Peace, we're given a ground-level view of the 1989 Tiananmen protest, a nearly 2 months long demonstration of sit-ins and hunger strikes, ending on June 4th with the massacre of students and workers alike. The film sets out to create a broad and comprehensive view of events, compiling scenes from inside the square, historical footage of significant moments in China's history, and interviews with student leaders, workers, and teachers who were involved. By giving us an inside look at the protest, the documentary reveals chaos and disorder amongst students, disagreements and conflict in the movement. Discord and infighting amongst leaders create a hectic and disorganized environment. Quarrels within the protests which are framed as reason for the movement's collapse. The film puts a particular emphasis on an interview by Chai Ling, a controversial exchange in which the de facto leader of the movement expresses extreme or radical views. While now seen by many as a traitor to the movement and its people, the documentary seems to label her beliefs as the reason for its downfall, shifting blame towards the protesters themselves.
I used to believe that we could establish democratic processes, and then a lot of people could use science to really help our country. But now I've come to realize that unless we overthrow this inhuman government, our country will have no hope. Our people will have no hope.
At dawn on June 4th, after occupying the square for more than 3 weeks, all the remaining students and their teachers and supporters left Tiananmen Square.
While the film does acknowledge the cruelty of the Chinese government, it turns to the disarray and divide between the protesters as a root of the mounting tensions and escalating situation. The Gate of Heavenly Peace straddles a line between two sides of the conflict, acknowledging the errors and crimes of the government, but treating the situation with delicate neutrality, a sense of distanced observation. It's this uncertainty and ambivalence in covering such conflicts that can lead to dangerous rhetoric, and brings into question the importance of objectivity in documentaries. Countless nations and states have histories of conflict and rebellion, pivotal moments in a country's past which can turn the tide for better or worse and exist in the fabric of modern societies. These traditions of revolution become ingrained in the lives of the people. Through cultures of protest and commemorations of conflict, we relive and remember the weight of the fight. The Gates of Heavenly Peace is a glimpse into the world of China's tradition of revolution. One of the world's oldest and most documented cultures, the last 110 years of Chinese history have been wrought with struggle and tension. As a storied nation, leaving behind its imperial ways, has become a fearsome leader in the world economy.
It was at Tiananmen that the People's Republic of China was founded. It was at Tiananmen that Mao announced, "The Chinese people have stood up."
But there's falsehood and irony in the term. China's revolutions have not always been honest, but often political movements orchestrated through propaganda under the guise of a people's autonomous and collective will. Since the seminal student protests of May 4th, 1911, China has been torn apart by struggles for power and movements of political indoctrination. Its most well-known revolutions simply a political tool for the ruling party.
Mao called it a cultural revolution. The people were enjoying Daminju, mass democracy. Chaos can't harm us, he proclaimed. It can only harm our enemies.
Despite the sinister nature of these so-called revolutions, they have remained a part of the political culture in China. They are, in effect, an example of the united power of the nation, still brimming with hope, the foundation for a new tradition of revolution, a true movement of resistance. The Tiananmen protests marked the beginning of this new tradition in China, the culmination of decades of discontentment manifested by the people in one of the largest demonstrations history has ever seen.
When the students of 1989 occupied Tiananmen Square, they made their headquarters here, beneath images of other students who changed China's history. They were consciously associating themselves with the tradition of student protest in China.
Unfortunately, the tragedy of June 4th would stifle revolutionary attempts for decades. The CCP's actions were a strong and violent statement, effectively ending any future rebellions before they could begin, and starting a campaign of misinformation and political control that would eliminate any inkling of resistance.
Arrests began immediately. Those caught throwing rocks at the troops or setting fire to army vehicles were tried and summarily executed.
Traditions of revolution exist to empower populations in the face of tyranny, to give a voice to the unheard. They manifest as cycles of disruption, shifting the status quo and looking to represent the marginalized. This film does one job well. It acts as a ledger for those it reaches, cementing this dark chapter in history. It doesn't disrespect or denigrate the lost lives, nor does it belittle the movement itself. And yet, the Gate of Heavenly Peace fails to be clear and direct in its message. It does not display anger or resentment, simply observing and commentating on events. Its dedication to providing context and information prevents it from having its own voice or demonstrating a sense of conviction.
Students dissatisfied with the status quo might have taken up the hard work of building democracy at the local level. Or they might have organized to demand redress of their own grievances as underpaid and undervalued intellectual workers. But that's not what interested most students. They talked, as Chinese students have always talked, of saving China.
Documentaries must not only be stirring and emotive, but take a firm position and use the medium as an instrument. When covering conflicts, neutrality and objectivity may serve only to harm those being oppressed. It is therefore both an artistic and moral responsibility for the revolutionary documentary to act as a tool of inspiration to drive political mimesis. As Jane M. Gaines said herself, the great tradition of social change documentary has been a commitment to representing injustice, with full knowledge that others somewhere will fight back, perhaps as a consequence of having seen these images. The documentary has become an important tool with a vital role in preserving traditions of revolution and moving people to act. We should look at the documentary as a tool of revolution to trigger collective action, rather than as a passive record of events. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, as Hong Kong continues its fight for freedom and the Uyghur people face an ongoing genocide. We must remember the plight of the oppressed and return to the origins of the activist documentary, giving a voice to the persecuted. Traditions of revolution continue to determine the fate of people and cultures around the world. As documentarians, we must understand it has become all the more important to preserve and protect these practices.
You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell.